What if Luke had to kill Vader to save the galaxy? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. Luke's lightsaber trembles in his hand. His father lies dying at his feet. The Emperor is gone. But something is terribly wrong. Luke, Anakin whispers, blood on his lips. You have to kill me. It's the only way. The galaxy hangs in the balance. Every second Luke hesitates, billions more will die. The Emperor's final trap is closing. And the only key to salvation lies in committing the one act Luke swore he'd never do: murder his own father. How did it come to this? How did the moment of Vader's redemption become the galaxy's greatest nightmare? Let's rewind to see how one small change in the Emperor's plans created an impossible choice that would test Luke Skywalker's very soul. The corridors of the second Death Star echo with distant battle sounds as Luke approaches the throne room. His heart pounds with hope. He believes he can save his father, redeem Darth Vader, and defeat the Emperor through love and compassion. Behind him, the sounds of the space battle rage on. Through the massive viewports that line the station's corridors, Luke can see the streaks of laser fire and the brilliant explosions of ships meeting their end. The Rebel Alliance has committed everything to this final assault, and Luke knows that the fate of the galaxy rests not just on the outcome of the space battle, but on what happens in the throne room ahead. As he reaches the massive doors leading to the Emperor's sanctum, Luke pauses. He can feel the dark side radiating from beyond, like heat from a furnace. But more than that, he can feel his father's presence, conflicted and tormented, caught between the light and darkness that have defined his existence for over 2 decades. Luke takes a deep breath, centering himself in the Force. He thinks of his training with Yoda on Dagobah, the ancient Jedi Master's words echoing in his mind. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Yet Luke knows that sometimes defense requires action. Sometimes protecting those you love means facing the darkness head-on. The doors slide open with a mechanical hiss, revealing the vast circular chamber beyond. At its center, the Emperor's throne rises like a dark monument to power and corruption. Seated upon it, Darth Sidious himself, his yellow eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction as he watches the battle through the towering viewport behind his chair. To one side, silent and imposing, stands Darth Vader, Luke's father, the man who was once Anakin Skywalker, hero of the Republic, now encased in black armor and sustained by machines, breathing with the mechanical rhythm that has haunted Luke's nightmares since their first encounter. "Welcome, young Skywalker," the Emperor says, his voice a silky whisper that carries clearly across the vast chamber. "I have been expecting you. You will find that your friends down on the sanctuary moon are walking into a trap, as is your rebel fleet. It was I who allowed the Alliance to know the location of the shield generator. It is quite safe from your pitiful little band. An entire legion of my best troops awaits them." Luke ignites his lightsaber, the green blade humming to life. "Your overconfidence is your weakness." The Emperor chuckles, a sound like autumn leaves rustling in a graveyard. "Your faith in your friends is yours." He gestures toward the viewport, where the space battle continues to rage. Witness the firepower of this fully armed and operational battle station. As if summoned by his words, the Death Star's superlaser begins to charge. Luke watches in horror as the massive weapon turns toward the rebel fleet, selecting a Mon Calamari cruiser as its target. The green beam lances out across space, and in an instant, the cruiser and all souls aboard are reduced to cosmic dust. "No," Luke whispers, feeling the deaths of hundreds of rebels through the Force. Each life extinguished is like a physical blow to his spirit. "From here, you will witness the final destruction of the Alliance and the end of your insignificant rebellion," the Emperor continues, savoring Luke's anguish. "Young fool, only now, at the end, do you understand? Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side. You have paid the price for your lack of vision." But Luke's eyes are not on the Emperor. They are on his father, searching for any sign of the man who was once Anakin Skywalker. "I feel the conflict within you," Luke says, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Let go of your hate. You still have good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully." For a moment, just a moment, Vader's posture seems to soften. The mechanical breathing that defines his existence seems to catch, as if some long-buried emotion is struggling to surface. The Emperor notices this as well, and his expression darkens. Such foolish sentiment. "Lord Vader, dispatch this pretender. Show him the true meaning of the dark side's power." Vader draws his lightsaber, the crimson blade igniting with its familiar snap hiss. But there is hesitation in his movements, a reluctance that Luke can sense through the Force. "I will not fight you, Father," Luke declares, deactivating his lightsaber and clipping it to his belt. "I can feel the good in you, the conflict. You were Anakin Skywalker once. You can be again." The Emperor's eyes narrow dangerously. "If you will not fight, then you will meet your destiny." He extends his withered hands, and crackling blue lightning erupts from his fingertips, striking Luke and sending him to the floor in agony. As Luke writhes in pain, his anguished cries fill the chamber. The Emperor laughs with sadistic pleasure, pouring more power into his attack. "Young fool, only now, at the end, do you understand? Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side." But then, something changes. Vader steps forward, his internal struggle finally reaching its breaking point. "No," he says, his voice carrying a tone Luke has never heard before. Not the mechanical authority of Darth Vader, but something more human, more vulnerable. "No, my son." The Dark Lord of the Sith reaches out and grasps his master by the shoulders, lifting the Emperor high above his head, despite the lightning that now courses through his own systems, overloading his life support and filling the chamber with the acrid smell of burning electronics. With a final surge of strength, Vader hurls the Emperor down the reactor shaft. Palpatine's scream echoes as he falls, punctuated by the explosive release of dark side energy as his body is consumed by the reactor's core. Vader collapses, his systems failing, his breathing more labored than ever. Luke crawls to his father's side, cradling the helmeted head in his lap. "Luke," Vader whispers, his voice weak and distorted by his damaged vocoder. "Help me take this mask off." "But you'll die," Luke protests, even as his hands move to the helmet's release mechanisms. "Nothing can stop that now," Vader replies. "Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." Luke carefully removes the black helmet and mask, revealing the pale, scarred face of Anakin Skywalker. For the first time, father and son look upon each other without barriers, without the imposing presence of Darth Vader between them. "You were right about me," Anakin says, his voice barely audible without the mechanical amplification. "Tell your sister, you were right." Luke feels tears streaming down his face as he holds his dying father. This is the moment he has dreamed of, the redemption he has believed in, despite all evidence to the contrary. His father has returned to the light, has chosen love over power, has saved his son at the cost of his own life. "I'm going to get you out of here," Luke says desperately. "We can start over. You can be free of all this darkness. We can be a family." Anakin's eyes, no longer the burning yellow of the Sith, but the gentle blue Luke remembers from the old holovids of the Clone Wars, focus on his son's face. "You already saved me, Luke. You were right. There was still good in me." But as they share this tender moment of reconciliation, something begins to change in the throne room. The air itself seems to thicken with malevolent energy. The lighting flickers and dims, and a sound like distant thunder begins to rumble through the station's superstructure. Luke feels it first, a disturbance in the Force, unlike anything he has ever experienced. It is ancient and powerful, a darkness so profound that it makes the Emperor's previous presence seem like a candle compared to a blazing sunday. The temperature in the chamber begins to drop, and frost forms on the polished surfaces of the throne room. Luke's breath becomes visible as the very air around them grows cold with an otherworldly chill. From the reactor shaft where the Emperor fell, a sickly green light begins to emanate, not the harsh green of the Death Star's superlaser, but something organic and corrupt, like the glow of diseased swamp gas. "What's happening?" Luke whispers, his voice barely audible in the suddenly oppressive atmosphere. Anakin's eyes widen with recognition and terror. "No," he breathes, his voice filled with a fear that Luke has never heard from his father, not even in their previous battles. "It can't be. He said it was only theoretical." The green light from the reactor shaft grows brighter, and with it comes a sound that defies description. Part laughter, part scream, part the grinding of cosmic machinery. The very foundations of the Death Star begin to vibrate with sympathetic resonance. And then, impossibly, a figure begins to rise from the reactor shaft. It is the Emperor, but changed. His robes are gone, incinerated in his fall, revealing a body that is more energy than flesh. Green fire courses through what remains of his form, and his eyes burn with an inner light that hurts to look upon directly. His face, already twisted by decades of dark side corruption, has become something barely recognizable as human. "Did you really think?" The transformed Palpatine speaks, his voice now a harmony of tones that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That a simple fall could destroy me? Did you believe that your pathetic display of sentiment could undo millennia of preparation?" Luke scrambles to his feet, igniting his lightsaber and positioning himself protectively over his father. "Impossible! You're dead. I felt your life force leave you. We both did." The Emperor's laugh now sounds like breaking glass mixed with distant thunder. "Death? I transcended such mortal limitations long ago, young Skywalker. What you felt was merely one layer of my existence being shed, like a snake discarding old skin." He floats in the air above them, no longer bound by gravity or physical law, his form flickering between solid matter and pure energy. You see, when I first discovered young Anakin on Tatooine, when I began his corruption during his years as a Padawan, I didn't simply turn him to the dark side. I performed a ritual, an ancient Sith technique that binds one Force-sensitive being to another. The revelation hits Luke like a physical blow. He staggers back, his lightsaber wavering in his grip. That's right. The Emperor continues, savoring Luke's horror. I bound my very essence to his. Every breath he takes feeds my power. Every beat of his heart sustains my immortality. As long as Darth Vader lives, I cannot truly die. Anakin's voice, weak and desperate, rises from where he lies, dying. Luke, it's true. I can feel him, always there in the back of my mind. Every atrocity I committed, every moment of rage and hatred, he was feeding off it, growing stronger. The Emperor's form becomes more solid as he speaks, drawing strength from the very act of revealing his triumph. Every time you believed you had struck a blow against the Empire, every victory your pathetic rebellion claimed, it was meaningless. I simply retreated into the sanctuary of Vader's consciousness and waited for the opportune moment to return. Luke's mind races, trying to process the implications. All those battles, all that sacrifice, all those lives lost in the fight against the Empire. And they had been fighting a war they could never truly win. The binding goes deeper than mere life force. The Emperor explains, with the patience of a teacher instructing a favored pupil. It is woven into the very fabric of his soul, intertwined with his connection to the Force itself. When he saved you just now, when he chose love over power, he merely strengthened the binding. Redemption, it turns out, makes for an even more potent anchor than hatred. From Luke's comlink, urgent voices begin to crackle through the static. Han Solo's voice tense with desperation. Luke, something's happening to the fleet. Ships that were destroyed are somehow repairing themselves. It's like they're being rebuilt by invisible hands. Leia's voice follows, equally panicked. Luke, we're detecting massive energy signatures across Imperial space. Every dead Star Destroyer, every abandoned base, they're all coming online at once. What's happening up there? The Emperor's laughter grows louder, echoing through the Force itself. Even now, across the galaxy, my true power awakens. Operation Cinder, my contingency protocols, the hidden fleets I have prepared for exactly this moment. They all activate in response to my resurrection. Luke can feel it through the Force, a wave of darkness spreading outward from the Death Star like ripples on a pond. On Coruscant, automated systems that have lain dormant since the Emperor's apparent death suddenly roar to life. Across the Outer Rim, secret Imperial bases buried beneath planetary surfaces begin to emerge, like technological flowers blooming in the desert. On Jakku, massive Star Destroyers that had been written off as war casualties suddenly power up their engines, their crews replaced by something that is no longer entirely human. On Biss, cloning facilities that were thought to be legends begin producing armies of soldiers, loyal only to the resurrected Emperor. You see, young Skywalker, Palpatine continues, his form now fully materialized and more powerful than ever. Your rebellion ends here. From the ashes of your hope, my true empire will rise. an empire where death itself has no meaning, where my will extends beyond the grave to ensure eternal order. Through the massive viewport behind the throne, Luke watches in horror as the space battle takes a turn for the impossible. Imperial Star Destroyers that had been crippled or destroyed suddenly begin to repair themselves, their hulls knitting back together with supernatural speed. Destroyed TIE fighters reassemble from cosmic debris, their pilots' voices eerily calm as they report for duty to commanders who should have been dead hours ago. The rebel fleet, already stretched to its limits, begins to fall back in confusion and terror. Admiral Akbar's voice comes over the comm. All ships fall back. We're facing something beyond our understanding. The enemy fleet is growing stronger instead of weaker. Luke feels the weight of billions of lives hanging in the balance. Every world that will burn under this resurrected empire, every child that will grow up in slavery, every freedom that will be crushed under the heel of eternal tyranny, all because he dared to hope for his father's redemption. There has to be another way, Luke pleads, looking desperately between the floating emperor and his dying father. There has to be some way to break the binding, some way to free him from your influence without. The emperor's smile is like acid eating through metal. Without killing dear old daddy? Oh, my naive young apprentice, there is indeed a way. Several ways. In fact, I could simply release the binding myself, allowing Vader to die and freeing you both from this predicament. Hope flares in Luke's chest. But the Emperor's next words crush it instantly. Of course. The price would be your complete surrender to the dark side. Kneel before me. Swear eternal loyalty to the Sith, and I will grant your father a peaceful death. Refuse, and watch as I use his life force to fuel an eternal empire that will span every world, every system, every corner of the galaxy, until the heat death of the universe itself. Luke's lightsaber trembles in his grip. The choice before him is impossible. Sacrifice his soul to save his father and damn the galaxy to eternal tyranny, or find some other way to break a binding that has existed for over 20 years. Think carefully, young Skywalker. The Emperor continues. Every second you hesitate, more of your precious rebels die. Every moment of indecision costs 1,000 lives. Your friends, Han and Leia, fighting desperately on the moon below. How long before my renewed forces overwhelm them? Your sister, so strong in the Force, she would make an excellent apprentice after you are gone. Through the Force, Luke can feel the battle raging on Endor's forest moon. Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and the Rebel strike team are fighting for their lives against an Imperial force that seems to know their every move. Stormtroopers who should be dead rise again with supernatural resilience. AT-ST walkers that were destroyed reassemble themselves with mechanical precision, but worse than the immediate threat is what Luke can sense spreading across the galaxy. On every Imperial world, in every system where the Empire once held sway, the darkness is awakening. Worlds that had tasted freedom for mere hours find themselves once again under the shadow of tyranny. On Naboo, Queen Apailana's palace is surrounded by clone troopers who march with the mechanical precision of the undead. On Alderaan's memorial sites, Imperial probe droids begin seeding the debris field with surveillance equipment, claiming the scattered remains of the planet for the Empire. Most terrifying of all, Luke can sense the Emperor's influence spreading to Force-sensitive beings across the galaxy. former Jedi who had escaped Order 66, find their minds clouded with whispers of surrender. Potential new Jedi, children just discovering their abilities, are drawn toward the dark side with an irresistible pull. "I can feel your anguish," the Emperor says, his voice now coming from everywhere at once. "It fuels me, strengthens the binding. Every moment of pain you experience makes it harder to break free. This is the true genius of the dark side. It uses your compassion against you." Anakin's voice, growing weaker by the moment, cuts through Luke's despair. "My son, listen to me. There may be another way, but it will require sacrifice beyond anything either of us has imagined." Luke kneels beside his father again, hope and dread warring in his heart. "Tell me, whatever it is, I'll do it." "The binding," Anakin whispers, his words coming in short gasps as his life support systems continue to fail, "was created through Sith alchemy, but it follows the same principles as all Force connections. It requires both participants to maintain it." The Emperor's expression changes for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "What are you saying?" Luke asks, though part of him already knows and dreads the answer. "If I were to voluntarily sever my connection to the Force entirely, to cut myself off from the energy that binds all life together, the binding would collapse. But such an action..." Anakin's eyes fill with tears. "Such an action would be final. No Force ghost, no continued existence, just nothing." Luke feels as if the floor has dropped out from under him. The Force ghost who appeared to him on Dagobah had been Ben Kenobi, maintaining his consciousness after death through his connection to the Force. What his father is suggesting would mean true death. No possibility of reunion, no chance to learn from him or continue their relationship beyond the grave. "There has to be another way," Luke insists. "The binding can't be that strong. Together, we can find a way to break it without." But even as he speaks, Luke can feel the Emperor's power growing stronger. The resurrected Sith Lord is drawing strength not just from Vader's life force, but from the chaos and despair spreading across the galaxy. Every rebel who falls, every world that surrenders, every moment of hope that dies, feeds the dark side ritual that binds father and son together. Through the viewport, Luke watches as another Mon Calamari cruiser is torn apart by a star destroyer that should have been space dust. The deaths of hundreds more rebels wash over him through the Force, each one a personal failure, a life he could have saved if only he had the strength to do what must be done. "Your father speaks truly," the Emperor says, his voice now carrying a note of genuine concern for the first time. Severing his connection to the Force would indeed break the binding. But consider what you would lose, young Skywalker. Not just his life, but any hope of speaking with him again, of learning the secrets he carries, of continuing the Skywalker legacy with his guidance. The manipulation is obvious, but that doesn't make it any less effective. Luke can feel the truth in the Emperor's words. If Anakin cuts himself off from the Force, there will be no possibility of return, no chance for the relationship Luke has dreamed of since learning the truth about his father. Moreover, the Emperor continues, there is no guarantee that such a desperate gambit would work. The binding has had 20 years to take root, to grow strong. Attempting to sever it might kill you both and leave me free to rule unopposed. But Anakin's voice, though weak, carries absolute certainty. No, my son. I can feel the binding structure through the Force. It is like a bridge. Destroy one end, and the whole structure collapses. But the destruction must be complete, must be willing, must be performed by someone who chooses love over existence itself. Luke finishes, the full horror of the choice before them becoming clear. The Emperor's laughter fills the chamber. Yes, now you begin to understand the true artistry of my trap. I have arranged things so that your victory requires the sacrifice of everything you hold dear. Love becomes the instrument of loss. Compassion becomes the source of anguish. But Luke is no longer listening to the Emperor. His attention is focused entirely on his father's face, on the gentle blue eyes that look up at him with such perfect understanding and acceptance. Luke, Anakin whispers, I have lived in darkness for 20 years. I have been a tool of evil, a weapon in the hands of tyranny. If my death can finally give meaning to my life, if my sacrifice can free the galaxy from this eternal shadow, then let me choose to die as Anakin Skywalker, not as Darth Vader. Through the Force, Luke can feel his father's resolve, unshakable and pure. But he can also feel something else, the binding itself, the dark thread that connects Anakin to the Emperor. It pulses with malevolent life, feeding on both the Sith Lord's hatred and the conflict in Luke's heart. I can't lose you, Luke says, the words torn from his heart. Not when I've just found you. Not when you finally come back to the light. You haven't lost me, Anakin replies, his mechanical hand reaching up to touch Luke's face with surprising gentleness. I will always be with you, in your memories, in the choices you make, in the man you become. The Force may be eternal, but love transcends even the Force. The Emperor's expression has shifted from amusement to genuine alarm. Do not listen to him, young Skywalker. He speaks of sacrifice, but consider what such a sacrifice would accomplish. I have contingencies beyond contingencies. Even if the binding is broken, even if I am destroyed here and now, do you think my death will truly end the darkness? As if summoned by his words, reports begin flooding in over the rebel communications. On Coruscant, Grand Moff Tarkin, who should have died with the first Death Star, broadcasts a message to all Imperial forces. His voice carries the same supernatural resonance as the Emperor's. Citizens of the Empire, Tarkin's voice echoes across the holonet. Recent events have revealed the true weakness of the rebellion. They celebrate temporary victories while the Empire prepares for eternal dominance. Operation Cinder is now in effect. All worlds that harbored rebels will be cleansed. Luke can sense the truth behind the Emperor's boast. The Sith Lord has indeed prepared for this possibility. Across the galaxy, Imperial leaders who were thought dead begin to make their presence known. Admiral Ozzel reports from a superstar destroyer that was supposedly destroyed at Hoth. Captain Neda's voice comes from a ship that exploded weeks ago. Death Star protocol is in effect. Comes another transmission, this one from the supposedly dead Grand Moff Wilhuff. Any system showing signs of rebellion will be sterilized completely. The Empire's mercy is at an end. The scope of the Emperor's preparation becomes clear. He has not simply bound himself to Vader, but has created a network of supernatural resilience throughout the Imperial command structure. Officers who die in service to the Empire are resurrected, their loyalty absolute, their humanity stripped away in favor of perfect obedience. But Luke can also sense something else through the Force, a weakness in the Emperor's grand design. The binding to Vader is the keystone, the central support that holds the entire structure together. Break it, and the supernatural network will collapse like a house of cards. You feel it too, Anakin says, his voice growing stronger despite his failing body. The binding is everything. It's the source of his power over death, over the Force itself. But Luke, you must understand, if we break the binding, if we sever the connection permanently, there will be consequences beyond my death. What kind of consequences? Luke asks, though he dreads the answer. The Force energy stored in the binding. It will have to go somewhere. It will likely release in an explosion that could destroy this entire station and everyone on it. You need to evacuate your friends. Get them to safety before. No, Luke interrupts firmly. If you're willing to sacrifice everything to save the galaxy, then I'm willing to stay here with you. We'll face whatever comes together. The Emperor's alarm becomes more pronounced. Foolish boy, you speak of noble sacrifice, but consider the practical reality. Even if you succeed in breaking the binding, even if my current form is destroyed, do you think the dark side will simply accept defeat? I am not the first Sith Lord to transcend death, nor will I be the last. Luke can feel the truth in these words as well. Through the Force, he senses other Dark Lords, stirring in the depths of space and time. Ancient Sith spirits that have been waiting for an opportunity to return to the physical realm. His victory here, if it comes, will be temporary, a reprieve, not a final resolution. But as he kneels beside his dying father, Luke realizes that this understanding doesn't change anything. Even temporary victories matter. Even incomplete triumphs save lives. And sometimes the choice between perfect victory and noble failure isn't really a choice at all. Luke, Anakin whispers, his voice now so quiet that Luke must lean close to hear. There is something else you need to know. The technique I'm proposing. It requires both of us. Luke's blood turns to ice. What do you mean? The binding connects us through you as well. You are my son, blood of my blood, heir to my connection with the Force. To break the binding completely, to ensure that it can never be re-established, we would both need to sever our connection to the Force. The full horror of the situation crashes over Luke like a tidal wave. Not only would he lose his father, but he would lose everything that makes him who he is. His lightsaber skills, his ability to sense danger, his connection to the cosmic force that binds all life together. Everything would be gone. I would be nothing, Luke breathes. Just ordinary, powerless. You would be free, Anakin corrects gently. Free from the burden of being the last Jedi. Free from the responsibility of rebuilding the Order. Free from the expectations that come with being the chosen one's son. But even as his father speaks, Luke can feel the wrongness of this path. The galaxy needs Jedi. It needs people who can stand against the darkness, who can protect the innocent and defend the weak. If he gives up his connection to the Force, who will take his place? Through their twin bond, he can feel Leia's growing strength in the Force. His sister has the potential to become a great Jedi herself, but she is untrained, unprepared for the responsibility that would fall to her if Luke voluntarily removes himself from the equation. There has to be another way. Luke insists, though his voice lacks conviction. Some other method of breaking the binding that doesn't require such a sacrifice. The Emperor, who has been listening to this exchange with growing agitation, suddenly speaks with renewed confidence. Indeed, there is another way, young Skywalker. A way that preserves your power, saves your father's life, and ensures the galaxy's stability under proper governance. Luke turns to face the floating Sith Lord, his expression guarded but hopeful. "Join me," the Emperor says simply. "Embrace the dark side fully and completely. And I will not only release the binding, but will grant your father a new body, free from the machines that keep him alive. Together, the three of us could rule the galaxy with wisdom and strength. Order would replace chaos. Peace would replace war." The offer hangs in the air between them, and Luke can feel its terrible appeal. Not just the promise of saving his father, but the seductive whisper of power itself. With the dark side flowing through him, Luke could indeed bring order to the galaxy. He could prevent wars before they start, eliminate corruption with a thought, ensure that no child ever suffers as he suffered on Tatooine. But he can also feel the trap within the offer. The dark side is called the dark side for a reason. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The peace the Emperor offers would be the peace of the grave, the order of tyranny. "Luke," Anakin's voice cuts through his internal struggle. "Remember what Master Yoda taught you. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. The Emperor's offer is built on fear. Fear of loss, fear of powerlessness, fear of making the hard choice. Through the Force, Luke can sense the truth of his father's words. But he can also sense the approaching disaster if they maintain the status quo. The Emperor's power continues to grow with each passing second. Across the galaxy, Imperial forces are overwhelming rebel positions that had been secured just hours ago. On Endor, Han Solo's voice crackles over the comm, filled with desperation. "Luke, whatever you're doing up there, do it fast. We're getting hit by forces that shouldn't exist. Stormtroopers are walking through our blaster fire like it's nothing." Leia's voice joins her husband's. "Luke, I can feel your conflict through the Force. Whatever choice you're facing, remember that we believe in you. We believe in the man you've become." Their faith in him is both a comfort and an additional burden. They trust him to make the right choice. But what if there is no right choice? What if every path leads to tragedy? The Emperor seems to sense Luke's growing despair. "Time grows short, young Skywalker. Every moment you hesitate, more of your friends die. The rebel fleet is in full retreat. The strike team on Endor is surrounded, and across the galaxy, worlds that celebrated their liberation mere hours ago are falling back under Imperial control." To emphasize his point, the Emperor gestures toward the viewport. Outside, the space battle has turned into a rout. The rebel fleet, already outnumbered, is now facing Imperial forces that seem to multiply even as they watch. Star destroyers that were confirmed destroyed are somehow back in the battle, their crews manning their stations with mechanical precision. Luke watches in horror as the Mon Calamari cruiser Independence, Admiral Akbar's flagship, comes under concentrated fire from 3 star destroyers. The ship's shields fail, and secondary explosions begin to ripple across its hull. Admiral Akbar is evacuating the bridge. Comes a transmission over the rebel frequencies. All remaining ships. This is General Calrissian. We're pulling back to the rendezvous point. This fight is over, but Luke can sense that even the retreat is not going according to plan. Imperial forces are somehow anticipating the rebels' movements, positioning themselves to intercept the fleeing ships. What should have been an organized withdrawal is becoming a massacre. "Luke," Anakin says, his voice urgent, despite his weakening condition, "we have to make the choice now. The binding is growing stronger with every death, every moment of despair. If we wait much longer, it will become impossible to break." Luke closes his eyes and reaches out through the Force, trying to find some alternative, some third option that doesn't require such devastating sacrifice. He can feel the binding clearly now, a dark thread connecting his father to the Emperor, pulsing with malevolent energy. But he can also feel its structure, its weaknesses. The binding is indeed like a bridge, as his father said. But it's not just a simple connection between 2 points. It's a complex weaving of Force energy, life force, and something else. Something that feels almost like love, but corrupted and twisted into possessiveness. The Emperor built the binding not just on power, but on attachment. On Vader's attachment to Padme, which became an attachment to power, which became an attachment to the dark side itself. The irony is almost too painful to bear. Love, the very force Luke believes can redeem his father, is also the foundation of the trap that binds them. But in that irony, Luke begins to see a possibility. "Father," he says, opening his eyes and looking directly into Anakin's face, "what if the binding doesn't need to be broken by severing our connection to the Force? What if it can be broken by transforming it instead?" Anakin's expression grows puzzled. "What do you mean?" "The binding is built on attachment, on possessiveness, on the fear of loss. But those are perversions of love, not love itself. True love is selfless. True love desires the beloved's happiness above all else, even above one's own survival." The Emperor's expression grows alarmed. "Do not listen to his naive philosophizing, Lord Vader. The boy speaks of concepts he does not understand." But Luke continues, his voice growing stronger as he speaks. "What if, instead of trying to destroy the binding through sacrifice, we transform it through a different kind of love? Not the possessive attachment the Emperor used to create it, but the selfless love that desires freedom for the beloved." Anakin's eyes begin to brighten with understanding. "You mean, if I willingly release you from any claim I might have, if I choose your freedom over my own survival, the binding might transform instead of break?" "More than that," Luke says, excitement building in his voice. "If we both choose to love without attachment, without possessiveness, without the fear of loss, then maybe the binding becomes something else entirely. Maybe it becomes a connection based on love instead of control." The Emperor's alarm becomes open panic. "No, the binding cannot be transformed. It was forged in the fires of the dark side, tempered with hatred and sealed with blood. It cannot simply be changed by wishful thinking. But Luke can feel through the Force that there is truth in his words. The binding is not as immutable as the Emperor claims. It is a construct of will and emotion, and will and emotion can be changed. Luke, Anakin says, his voice filled with wonder. I can feel it. The binding is responding to our conversation, changing even as we speak. The dark threads they're becoming lighter, more transparent. The Emperor's form begins to flicker, his supernatural solidity wavering as the binding that anchors him to the physical realm starts to shift. This is impossible. 20 years of careful construction cannot be undone by sentiment. But Luke can see that it is possible. The key is not to fight the binding or try to destroy it, but to change its fundamental nature. Instead of a chain forged in the fires of possession and control, it can become a bridge built from love and sacrifice. Father, Luke says, taking Anakin's mechanical hand in his own, are you willing to try to transform what the Emperor meant as slavery into something that serves the light instead of the darkness? Anakin's smile, weak but genuine, spreads across his scarred features. My son, I have been a slave to the dark side for 20 years. If I can choose to be bound by love instead of hate, by service instead of domination, then yes, I am willing to try. Together, father and son close their eyes and reach out through the Force, not to break the binding but to understand it, to feel its structure and flow. Luke can sense the Emperor's desperate attempts to maintain control, to keep the binding rooted in darkness and attachment. But love, Luke realizes, is stronger than hate. Not because it overpowers darkness through force, but because it transforms darkness by its very presence. Where the binding once fed on fear and possessiveness, it now begins to resonate with sacrifice and selflessness. I release any claim I have over you, Anakin whispers, his words carrying power through the Force. I choose your freedom over my survival, your happiness over my desires. Whatever connection exists between us, let it serve the light, not the darkness. Luke feels the binding shift and change, its dark threads becoming something brighter and more beautiful. And I choose to love you not as someone I need to save or control, but as someone I'm honored to know. Whatever happens to either of us, let it be in service to love, not fear. The transformation is visible to the naked eye. The dark energy that has filled the throne room begins to dissipate, replaced by something warmer and more peaceful. The Emperor's form becomes increasingly translucent as the anchor that binds him to the physical realm is transformed into something he cannot control or corrupt. No! Palpatine shrieks, his voice becoming more distant as his connection to the physical realm weakens. You cannot simply choose to love your way out of the dark side. The binding is sealed with blood and hatred. It cannot be changed, but even as he protests, the Emperor's form continues to fade. The binding that once gave him immortality is still present, but it no longer serves his will. Instead, it has become a conduit for the light side of the Force, a connection that strengthens both father and son without enslaving either. Luke can feel the change spreading outward from the throne room, rippling through the Emperor's network of supernatural control. Across the galaxy, Imperial officers who had been resurrected as undead servants suddenly find their humanity returning. The Star Destroyers that had been rebuilding themselves through dark side alchemy lose their supernatural cohesion and begin to drift as derelicts. The space battle outside the Death Star takes a sudden turn as the Imperial fleet, no longer coordinated by supernatural means, begins to fall into disarray. Rebel ships that had been retreating in despair suddenly find themselves facing a confused and disorganized enemy. The transformation is visible across the entire battlefield. Star Destroyers that had been moving with perfect coordination suddenly begin to drift out of formation. TIE fighter squadrons that had been executing flawless attack patterns suddenly scatter as individual pilots begin to question their orders. Admiral Akbar's voice comes over the comm, filled with cautious hope. All ships, the Imperial fleet is breaking formation. They seem to have lost coordination, but maintain defensive postures. This could be a trap, but it quickly becomes clear that this is no tactical deception. Across the Imperial fleet, something unprecedented is happening. On the bridge of the Super Star Destroyer Executor, Admiral Piet suddenly stops in the middle of issuing an order to target the rebel medical frigate. His face goes pale as he realizes what he was about to command. "Belay that order," he says quietly. Then louder, "All ships, cease fire immediately. Communications, get me a channel to the rebel fleet." Similar scenes play out across dozens of Imperial vessels. Captain Lennox of the Star Destroyer Devastator finds himself staring at a tactical display showing a crippled rebel transport filled with evacuating civilians. The order to destroy it dies on his lips as he suddenly remembers why he joined the Imperial Navy in the first place. To protect people, not slaughter them. "Helm, move us between the rebel transport and the interdictor," he commands. "If anyone asks, tell them we're experiencing engine difficulties." On Endor, the changes are even more dramatic. Stormtroopers who had been advancing with mechanical precision suddenly stumble and fall, not from weapon fire, but from the sudden return of individual will and conscience. Many remove their helmets, gasping as if breathing free air for the first time in years. Han Solo's excited voice crackles through the comm. "Luke, I don't know what you did up there, but the imps aren't just retreating, they're surrendering. Half of them are throwing down their weapons. The scene on the forest moon is unprecedented in the history of the Empire. Entire squads of stormtroopers are laying down their arms, their white armor scattered across the forest floor as men and women emerge from beneath the faceless masks. Many are weeping, others stare in shock at their surroundings, as if seeing the natural world for the first time. Commander Jarek of the 501st Legion finds himself face to face with a young Ewok warrior who had been about to strike him down with a spear. But instead of the mechanical response his training demands, Jarek feels a flood of emotions he had forgotten he possessed. He removes his helmet, revealing a scarred face and eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispers to the Ewok, who stares at him in confusion. "I'm so sorry for what we've done to your world." Leia, coordinating the rebel forces from a command post built into a massive tree, watches in amazement as Imperial after Imperial emerges from the forest, hands raised, not in surrender, but in greeting. Many are asking if they can help with the evacuation, if there's anything they can do to make amends for their actions under Imperial control. "Han," she calls over the comm, "we're going to need more transport capacity. We've got about 300 Imperial defectors asking for passage off-world." Back on the Death Star, Luke can feel these transformations rippling across the galaxy through his connection to his father. The bond that had once enslaved Anakin to the Emperor's will has become a conduit for liberation, spreading outward like ripples on a cosmic pond. But the most significant change is happening right there in the throne room. Anakin's failing life support systems suddenly stabilize, no longer drained by the dark side binding. His breathing becomes easier, his color improves, and strength flows back into his limbs. "Luke," he says, his voice clear and strong for the first time since removing his helmet. "I can feel the darkness leaving me. 20 years of shadow, 20 years of hate and fear, and it's just gone." But even as he speaks, Luke can sense that the transformation is far from complete. The Emperor, though weakened, still clings to the physical realm with desperate fury. His form flickers between solid matter and pure energy, searching for any anchor that might allow him to maintain his hold on existence. "You think this changes anything?" The Emperor snarls, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You think your pathetic display of sentiment can undo the fundamental nature of the dark side itself?" Luke can feel the Emperor reaching out through the Force, trying to tap into other sources of dark side energy across the galaxy. On Korriban, ancient Sith tombs begin to glow with malevolent light, as Palpatine attempts to draw power from the resting places of long-dead Dark Lords. On Dromund Kaas, buried temples stir with unnatural life, as the Emperor tries to channel the accumulated hatred of millennia. The dark side is eternal. The Emperor continues, his form growing more solid as he draws on these ancient reservoirs of power. It existed before the first Jedi drew breath, and it will exist long after the last of your kind is dust. You have merely delayed the inevitable. But Luke can sense something the Emperor cannot. The very sources of power he's trying to tap are changing in response to the transformed binding. The ancient hatred stored in Sith temples begins to neutralize as it comes into contact with the purified connection between Luke and his father. The accumulated darkness of centuries starts to dissolve like shadows before the dawn. Anakin struggles to his feet, his renewed strength allowing him to stand without assistance for the first time in decades. "Master," he says, addressing the Emperor with none of the deference that once characterized their relationship. "You taught me that the dark side was power, but you never understood what true power really is." The Emperor's attempts to draw from external sources grow more frantic as each reservoir of dark side energy he touches is transformed or neutralized. Impossible! The Sith have ruled through strength for 1,000 generations. The Sith have ruled through fear. Anakin corrects, his voice carrying new authority. Through manipulation, through the exploitation of others' pain and weakness. But that was never real power. It was parasitism. You fed on the suffering of others because you had no strength of your own. Luke watches as his father faces the Emperor with complete calm and certainty. This is not the broken, conflicted Darth Vader who had struggled between light and darkness, but Anakin Skywalker reborn, not just redeemed, but transformed into something greater than he had ever been before. The Emperor makes one final desperate attempt to maintain his hold on the physical realm, drawing on reserves of dark side energy that he has hoarded for decades. He tries to reassert his control over the binding that connects him to Vader. "You think love conquers all?" he shrieks, his form briefly becoming solid again as he pours everything he has into this last gambit. "Let me show you the true power of the dark side," He unleashes a torrent of force lightning more powerful than anything he has ever produced before. The very air in the throne room ionizes as bolts of pure electrical fury arc toward both Luke and Anakin. The attack is meant to destroy them both instantly, to end their defiance through overwhelming force. But the transformed binding acts as more than just a conduit. It becomes a lens that focuses and purifies the Emperor's hatred, transforming it into something entirely different. Luke feels a surge of energy flow through him. But instead of the agony he expects, he experiences a profound sense of peace and compassion. The Emperor's lightning, filtered through the purified connection between father and son, becomes something unprecedented. A wave of pure love and understanding that spreads outward from the Death Star in all directions. Luke can feel it touching every mind in the star system, then beyond, reaching across hyperspace to planets throughout the galaxy. On Coruscant, Grand Moff Tarkin stops in the middle of broadcasting a message of Imperial dominance. His face, which had shown only cold calculation for decades, suddenly crumples with anguish as he fully comprehends the enormity of his crimes. Citizens of the Empire, his voice cracks over the holonet. We have all been deceived. The things we have done in the name of order, the lives we have destroyed in the pursuit of peace. How can we ever find forgiveness? Similar scenes play out across the galaxy as the wave of transformed energy reaches system after system. On Sullust, Imperial mining overseers suddenly see the conditions they have forced upon the native population and immediately begin releasing political prisoners and improving working conditions. On Botha, Imperial intelligence officers destroy their own surveillance networks, unable to bear the thought of continuing to spy on innocent beings. The transformation is not universal. Some beings are too far gone in their embrace of darkness to be reached, and others simply choose to ignore the moment of clarity they experience. But for billions across the galaxy, the Emperor's final attack becomes the catalyst for a great awakening. On Kessel, the spice mines that have enslaved countless beings for generations suddenly see their overseers laying down their weapons and opening the prison cells. Wookiee slaves emerge, blinking into daylight they haven't seen in decades, supported by the very guards who had tormented them just hours before. The transformation is so complete that former prisoners and their captors work together to organize relief efforts for those too weak to travel. On Kashyyyk, the Imperial garrison that has been systematically harvesting the planet's forests suddenly stops their operations. Colonel Desard, who had overseen the destruction of entire groves of Roshia trees, stands in the middle of a devastated forest clearing with tears streaming down his face. "What have we done to this beautiful world?" he whispers, before immediately ordering his troops to begin reforestation efforts. The wave of transformation reaches even the most remote outposts of Imperial power. On the prison world of Kessel, political prisoners who had been scheduled for execution find their guards opening their cells and offering them food and medical care. On the mining colony of Sullust, Imperial overseers who had been working Sullustan miners to death suddenly implement safety protocols and fair labor practices. But perhaps most remarkably, the transformation extends to the criminal underworld that had flourished under the Empire's corrupt rule. On Nar Shaddaa, crime lords who had built their empires on the suffering of others suddenly find themselves unable to continue their operations. Prince Caesar of the Black Sun Crime Syndicate broadcasts a message across the galactic underworld, formally dissolving his organization and dedicating its resources to humanitarian efforts. For too long, I have profited from the pain and desperation of others, Zizor's message declares. The credits I have accumulated through exploitation mean nothing compared to the lives I could save through compassion. Effective immediately. All Black Sun operations are terminated. Our fleet will be dedicated to refugee relief. Our resources to rebuilding what we helped destroy. Similar declarations come from across the galaxy as beings who had built their power on the suffering of others experienced their own moments of awakening. On Rhodia, bounty hunters who had specialized in capturing political dissidents for the Empire suddenly find themselves organizing rescue operations for the very people they had been hunting. The Emperor himself staggers as he realizes what has happened. His attempt to reassert control has instead accelerated the transformation of his own power base. Everywhere his influence once spread corruption and control, there is now understanding and choice. The very foundations of his dark side network are crumbling, not through external attack, but through internal transformation. "What have you done to me?" he whispers, his voice no longer carrying the authority of a dark lord, but the confusion of a lost and frightened man. The supernatural power that had sustained him for decades is being converted into something he cannot comprehend or control. Luke rises to his feet, his lightsaber deactivated and hanging at his side. When he speaks, his voice carries infinite compassion, but also unshakable certainty. "We haven't done anything to you. We've simply revealed what was always true, that darkness is not the opposite of light, but merely the absence of it, and no absence can stand against presence forever." The Emperor's form begins to waver as the fundamental nature of his existence changes. For 50 years, he has maintained his identity through hatred and the domination of others. But as those sources of power are transformed, he finds himself faced with a terrible choice: evolve or dissolve completely. You cannot simply choose compassion and expect the universe to change, he protests. But his words lack conviction. Even as he speaks, Luke can sense the conflict within him, not the struggle between light and dark that had defined his existence for so long, but between the twisted thing he has become and the memory of who he once was. "I'm not asking the universe to change," Luke replies gently, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I'm asking you to remember who you were before you became afraid of losing what you loved." For just a moment, the Emperor's appearance shifts dramatically. Instead of the yellow-eyed monster of the dark side, Luke sees a much younger man, idealistic, passionate, genuinely concerned about the suffering he sees around him. The vision lasts only an instant, but it's enough to reveal the tragic truth that has driven this entire conflict. Sheev Palpatine had not been born evil. He had been born with the same capacity for good and ill as anyone else. But fear of loss, fear of powerlessness, fear of death itself, had led him down a path from which he thought he could never return. Until now. The Emperor, no, Palpatine, the man he had once been before the fear consumed him, looks at Luke with eyes that are no longer the burning yellow of the Sith, but a deep, sad brown that speaks of decades of accumulated regret. "I wanted to save the galaxy," he whispers, his voice breaking with the weight of recognition. I wanted to bring order to the chaos, to prevent the suffering I saw everywhere around me. But somewhere along the way, you became so afraid of losing control that you forgot what you were trying to control it for. Luke finishes gently. You became so focused on preventing suffering that you caused more suffering than you ever prevented. Tears begin to stream down Palpatine's face. Not the manipulative tears of a politician seeking advantage, but the genuine grief of a man confronting the ruins of his life's work. How many died because of my choices? How many worlds burned because I was too proud to admit I was wrong? How many families were destroyed because I convinced myself that the ends justified any means? The questions hang in the air, heavy with the weight of incalculable tragedy. Luke can sense through the Force that Palpatine is not asking for answers, but for absolution, something that only he himself can provide. Anakin, who has been silent during this exchange, finally speaks. His voice is gentle but firm, carrying the authority of someone who has walked the same dark path and found his way back to the light. The number doesn't matter, he says quietly. What matters is what you choose to do now, that you understand the true cost of your actions. The pilot looks up at Anakin with recognition dawning in his eyes. You're Anakin Skywalker, the hero of the Clone Wars. But you became Darth Vader, yes. Anakin acknowledges without shame or defensiveness. I know what it feels like to have done things that seem unforgivable. I know what it's like to look back at your actions and wonder if you're even still human. But I also know that redemption is possible, no matter how far you've fallen. Palpatine's gaze shifts between Luke and Anakin, seeing in them living proof that transformation is possible even for those who have committed the gravest sins. But how? He asks, his voice barely a whisper. How do you live with the knowledge of what you've done? How do you find the strength to continue when you know that your actions have caused such immeasurable pain? Luke steps closer to the former Emperor, his presence radiating not judgment but understanding. You live by making sure it never happens again. You live by helping others, by using whatever power and knowledge you have to repair the damage that was done. You can't undo the past, but you can help build a better future. And sometimes, Anakin adds, his voice heavy with hard-won wisdom, the people who have fallen furthest into darkness are the ones who can shine the brightest light once they find their way back, because they understand better than anyone the true cost of choosing fear over love. The transformation that follows is unlike anything Luke has ever witnessed through the Force. Palpatine's physical form begins to dissolve, but instead of the violent disintegration Luke had expected, it becomes something beautiful, like a flower blooming in reverse, or a butterfly returning to its chrysalis to emerge as something entirely new. The dark side energy that had sustained him for decades is released in waves, but it doesn't dissipate into nothingness or explode in destructive fury. Instead, it transforms as it flows outward, becoming pure Force energy that spreads across the galaxy to heal the wounds his reign had inflicted upon countless worlds. On Alderaan's memorial site, where fragments of the destroyed planet drift in eternal orbit, the released energy begins to coalesce around the largest debris. Slowly, impossibly, the fragments begin to draw together, not to rebuild the planet that is beyond even the Force's power to accomplish, but to create something new. a living memorial that will serve as a reminder of the cost of unchecked power and a beacon of hope for those who have lost everything. On Coruscant, the energy touches the sprawling cityscape and begins to heal decades of urban decay. Buildings that had been crumbling from neglect suddenly find their foundations strengthened. Parks that had been paved over for military installations burst with new growth as grass and trees emerge from beneath duracrete and permacrete. The transformation spreads to every world touched by imperial oppression. On Ryloth, slave quarters are converted into schools and hospitals. On Mon Calamari, shipyards that had been forced to produce instruments of war are retooled to create vessels of exploration and relief. On Botha-Wee, surveillance networks are transformed into communication systems that connect families separated by war. Thank you. Palpatine's voice echoes as his form completes its transformation. No longer the whisper of a dying tyrant, but the grateful acknowledgement of a soul finally finding peace. Thank you for reminding me who I used to be, for giving me the chance to choose who I could become. With those words, the last physical trace of Emperor Palpatine vanishes completely. But Luke can sense through the Force that this is not death as he understands it, but metamorphosis. The man who had become a monster has finally found the strength to remember his humanity and choose redemption over destruction. The energy of his transformation continues to ripple outward, touching lives across the galaxy in ways both subtle and profound. Former Imperial officers find themselves remembering the oaths they had sworn to protect and serve, not to conquer and destroy. Stormtroopers recall their names and identities, rediscovering the individual personalities that had been suppressed by Imperial conditioning. But most importantly, ordinary citizens throughout Imperial space experience a lifting of fear and oppression they had lived with for so long they had forgotten what freedom felt like. The supernatural dread that had emanated from Imperial installations dissipates, replaced by a sense of possibility and hope. On Tatooine, moisture farmers who had been systematically exploited by Imperial tax collectors suddenly find those same officials arriving at their farms with offers of assistance and reparations. The stark desert world, which had known only hardship and oppression, begins to bloom as Imperial resources are redirected from exploitation to development. Luke can feel all of this through his connection to his father, their bond serving as a conduit for the transformation energy that continues to spread across the galaxy. But he can also sense that the process is not yet complete. There are still pockets of resistance, still beings who cling to the old ways of fear and control. "Father," he says, turning to Anakin with concern, "I can sense that not everyone has been reached by the transformation. There are still Imperial forces that remain loyal to the old order, still beings who choose darkness, even when offered the chance to choose light." Anakin nods gravely. That was always going to be the case. Free will means the freedom to choose wrongly as well as rightly. But Luke, look at what we have accomplished. The majority of the Empire has been transformed from within. Those who remain committed to the dark side are now a small minority rather than the ruling power. Through the massive viewport behind the former Emperor's throne, they can see the proof of Anakin's words. The space battle that had been raging when they entered the throne room has transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. A coordinated relief and rescue operation involving ships from both sides of the conflict. Imperial Star Destroyers that had been trying to destroy Rebel ships minutes before are now positioning themselves to provide escort and protection for damaged Rebel vessels. TIE fighter squadrons that had been attacking with lethal precision are now flying cover for Rebel evacuation shuttles. The transformation of the Imperial fleet is remarkable to witness through the Force. Luke can sense the individual moments of awakening occurring throughout the massive armada. A gunner who suddenly realizes he's been targeting civilian transports. A communications officer who discovers she's been jamming distress calls from refugee ships. A bridge crew that collectively decides to disobey orders to retreat and instead assist in rescue operations. Captain Piet of the Super Star Destroyer Executor broadcasts on all Imperial frequencies. This is Admiral Piet of the Imperial Navy. All Imperial vessels are ordered to cease hostilities immediately and render assistance to any damaged ships, regardless of their previous allegiance. Any officer who continues to fire on non-combatants will be immediately relieved of duty and confined pending investigation. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Across the Imperial fleet, weapon systems are powered down and sensor arrays are reconfigured for search and rescue operations. Imperial engineers begin coordinating with Rebel technicians to pool their expertise for emergency repairs. Medical ships that had been standing by to treat Imperial casualties instead open their doors to wounded rebels and civilians. Luke watches through the viewport as an Imperial medical frigate maneuvers alongside a crippled Mon Calamari cruiser, extending docking tubes to evacuate the wounded. Imperial doctors and nurses, many of whom had never treated non-humans before, work side by side with Rebel medics to save lives without regard for species or political affiliation. "It's beautiful," Luke whispers, tears streaming down his face as he witnesses the transformation of hatred into love, of division into unity. But their moment of contemplation is interrupted by urgent communications from the Rebel fleet. General Calrissian's voice crackles through the comm with new urgency. "Luke, the Death Star's reactor is showing critical instability. I don't know what happened up there, but the entire station is starting to come apart. The energy readings are off the charts. You need to get out of there now." Through the viewport, Luke can see that Lando is right. The Death Star, no longer held together by the Emperor's supernatural will and destabilized by the massive release of Force energy from his transformation, is beginning to succumb to the accumulated damage from the battle. Warning lights flash throughout the massive structure, and the deep rumble of failing systems echoes through the corridors. But more than structural damage, Luke can sense through the Force that the station itself is changing. The dark side energy that had been woven into its very construction is being transformed, and the structure simply cannot contain the massive flows of purified Force energy that are now coursing through its systems. "We need to evacuate immediately," Anakin says, his renewed connection to the Force allowing him to sense the impending catastrophe. But Luke, there are thousands of people still aboard this station. Imperial personnel, construction crews, maintenance workers, they need to be evacuated as well. Luke nods without hesitation. The thought of leaving anyone aboard a doomed station, regardless of their previous allegiance, is unthinkable. Then we help them evacuate. All of them, together. They make their way toward the hangar where Luke's shuttle waits. But their path takes them through corridors filled with Imperial personnel in various states of shock and awakening. The transformation they witnessed in the throne room is being repeated throughout the station, as beings who had served the Empire unquestioningly suddenly find themselves faced with the full weight of their actions. Some stand motionless in the corridors, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Others are weeping openly, overwhelmed by the sudden return of emotions they had forgotten they possessed. Many are actively trying to help with the evacuation, their training taking over even as their worldview crumbles around them. Luke notices that many have removed their rank insignia and imperial symbols, as if the markers of hierarchy and authority have suddenly become meaningless to them. Without the supernatural compulsion that had bound them to the Empire, they are rediscovering their individual identities and moral agency. A young Imperial lieutenant, barely out of the academy, approaches them with tears streaming down his face. His uniform is disheveled, and he moves with the unsteady gait of someone whose entire reality has just been upended. Lord Vader. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening," he says, his voice breaking with confusion and fear. "I feel different, like I've been asleep for years and just woke up. The things I've done, the orders I've followed. How could I have been part of something so terrible?" Anakin places a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder, his touch conveying understanding and compassion. "You have been asleep, Lieutenant. We all have, in different ways. But now it's time to wake up and choose who we want to be going forward." The lieutenant looks at Anakin with dawning recognition. "You're not Darth Vader anymore, are you? You're him. Anakin Skywalker, the hero of the Republic." "I'm both," Anakin replies simply. "I'm the man who fell to darkness and the man who chose to return to the light, just as you can be both the person who served the Empire and the person who chooses to serve something better." As they continue through the corridors, they encounter more and more Imperials experiencing similar awakenings. A squad of stormtroopers has removed their helmets and is helping evacuate civilian contractors from the lower levels, their faces showing a mixture of determination and grief as they confront the reality of what they've been part of. A group of TIE pilots is organizing the rescue of rebel prisoners from the detention blocks, working with systematic efficiency to ensure that no one is left behind. Their leader, a veteran pilot with decades of service, explains to Luke, "We were the ones who put them in there. It's our responsibility to get them out. An Imperial intelligence unit has taken it upon themselves to destroy their own surveillance equipment and data files, working frantically to ensure that the Empire's spy networks cannot be reconstituted." One officer explains between sobs, 30 years of spying on innocent people, 30 years of destroying lives for the sake of security. We have to make sure this information can never be used to hurt anyone again. We need to help them," Luke says, stopping to assist a group of technicians who are trapped behind a sealed blast door that has malfunctioned due to the station's failing systems. Luke uses the Force to tear open the heavy door, the screech of rending metal echoing through the corridor. But instead of simply opening a path, he takes the time to ensure the door's safety systems are properly reset, preventing it from closing again and potentially trapping others. As the Imperial technicians rush through the opening, several stop to thank him, their faces showing a mixture of gratitude and confusion that anyone would risk themselves to help former enemies. "Why are you helping us?" one of them asks. A middle-aged woman whose Imperial engineering uniform is marked with years of service ribbons. "We're your enemies. We built this weapon of mass destruction. No, Luke replies with absolute conviction. You're not my enemies. You never were. You were just people who didn't have a real choice. Now you do. The woman stares at him for a moment, then nods slowly. What can we do to help? With the evacuation, I mean. We know this station better than anyone. It's an offer that Luke accepts gratefully. As they move deeper into the station, their group grows larger as more Imperial personnel join the evacuation effort. Engineers who had built the Death Star now use their intimate knowledge of its systems to guide people to safety. Communications officers coordinate with the rescue fleet outside. Even administrative personnel contribute by organizing the evacuation lists to ensure no one is forgotten. Anakin watches as his son helps Imperial after Imperial reach the evacuation shuttles, his actions serving as a living example of the compassion and redemption they had achieved in the throne room. You're showing them what it means to choose love over fear, he observes. You're teaching them through your actions, not just your words. They weren't really free to choose before, Luke replies, using the Force to lift a fallen beam that was blocking another group of evacuees. The Emperor's influence, the dark side corruption that permeated the Empire, it made genuine choice impossible. Now, they are truly free to decide what they believe in. As they move through the station, the effects of the Emperor's transformation become even more apparent. In one corridor, they find a group of Imperial intelligence officers not just destroying their surveillance equipment, but actively compiling lists of political prisoners and dissidents who need to be freed from Imperial detention facilities across the galaxy. The rebellion will need this information to locate and rescue everyone we've imprisoned, explains Agent Callus, a senior intelligence operative whose face shows the strain of confronting decades of morally compromising work. We have the locations of every black site, every secret prison, every detention facility in Imperial space. It's the least we can do to help undo the damage. In another section, they encounter a group of Imperial stormtroopers who have not only removed their helmets but are systematically destroying their own weapons and armor. Their sergeant, a veteran of countless campaigns, explains their actions. These uniforms, these weapons, they're symbols of oppression, he says, his voice heavy with regret. We can't undo what we've done while wearing them, but we can make sure they're never used to hurt innocent people again. But perhaps most remarkably, they encounter Imperial officers who are actively working to sabotage their own military installations. A naval communications officer is broadcasting shutdown codes to Imperial bases throughout the galaxy, while a logistics coordinator is redirecting supply convoys away from military installations and toward refugee camps. We built this machine of oppression, explains Admiral Ozzel, who had been overseeing Death Star operations before his transformation. It's our responsibility to tear it down, piece by piece, if necessary. By the time they reach Luke's shuttle, they have gathered not just a small group of defectors, but what amounts to a small army of former Imperial personnel who have chosen to dedicate their lives to undoing the harm they were part of. The hangar is filled with beings from dozens of worlds and species, all united by their desire to help with the evacuation and their commitment to building something better than what they've left behind. The shuttle bay itself has been transformed into an impromptu refugee processing center, where Imperial and Rebel personnel work side by side to organize the massive evacuation effort. Former enemies share resources and expertise. Their common humanity overriding the artificial divisions that had separated them just hours before. Among the groups gathered in the hangar, Luke notices several that particularly capture his attention. A team of Imperial scientists is working frantically to compile and transmit their research data, not to preserve Imperial weapons technology, but to ensure that their more benevolent discoveries, medical treatments, agricultural improvements, environmental restoration techniques, are not lost in the Empire's collapse. A squad of Imperial Special Forces soldiers has volunteered to remain behind until the very last moment, using their training and equipment to search for any remaining personnel in the station's most dangerous areas. Their leader, a grizzled sergeant with scars from countless battles, explains their decision simply, "We've spent our careers following orders to hurt people. Now we're choosing to follow our conscience to save them." Most touching of all is a group of Imperial Academy cadets, young people barely out of their teens, who had been training to become the Empire's next generation of officers. Instead of fleeing to safety, they have organized themselves into teams to help carry wounded and elderly evacuees who cannot make the journey to the shuttles on their own. One of the cadets, a Corellian girl who couldn't be more than 18, approaches Luke with tears in her eyes. "Sir, I just wanted to thank you for showing us that there was another way, for giving us the chance to choose who we want to be." Luke places a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You made the choice yourself. That's what makes it meaningful." Among the evacuees, Luke also notices several who particularly capture his attention, not because of their rank or position, but because of their stories and their commitment to making amends for their past actions. The throne room falls silent except for the distant sounds of the space battle, which is now clearly turning in the rebels' favor. Luke and Anakin sit together in the sudden peace, father and son, connected by a bond that is stronger than ever, but no longer tainted by darkness. Through the massive viewport, they can see the Imperial fleet in complete disarray. Star destroyers that had been firing moments before now drift silently, their crews paralyzed by the sudden return of conscience and free will. Some ships are even turning their weapons away from the rebel fleet, their captains unable to continue a battle they now recognize as fundamentally wrong. "Is he gone?" Luke asks, hardly daring to believe it. Anakin closes his eyes and reaches out through the Force, his senses now clearer than they have been in decades. "The Emperor? Yes. His hold on this realm is broken." "But Luke, I can sense something else. The transformation of the binding. It's had consequences beyond what we imagined." "What kind of consequences?" "The dark side network he created, the supernatural control he held over the Imperial forces. It's not just gone. It's been inverted. Everywhere his influence once spread corruption and control, there's now freedom, understanding, choice." Through the Force, Luke can sense what his father means. The change is like a wave rolling across the galaxy, touching every world that had felt the Emperor's influence. But instead of the destructive wave they might have expected, this is a wave of awakening, of liberation from mental and spiritual chains that many beings had never even realized they wore. On Tatooine, Jabba the Hutt's palace suddenly erupts in chaos as the crime lord's supernatural hold over his minions dissolves. Slaves who had been conditioned to accept their fate suddenly remember their dignity and worth. Many flee into the desert, but others stay to ensure that the palace's remaining slaves are freed as well. On Ryloth, Imperial forces that had been ruthlessly exploiting the planet's resources suddenly find themselves unable to continue their operations. Colonel Belindi Kalenda of the Imperial Security Bureau stares at reports of Twi'lek children being sold into slavery and feels physically sick. Within hours, she has ordered the arrest of every Imperial official involved in the trade and begun organizing humanitarian aid for the affected communities. The transformation is not limited to Imperial space. On worlds throughout the galaxy, beings who had been influenced by the dark side in more subtle ways experience their own moments of awakening. Crime lords find themselves unable to continue their operations. Corrupt officials resign from their positions, and even ordinary citizens who had become callous or indifferent to suffering around them suddenly rediscover their capacity for empathy. From Luke's comlink, urgent voices crackle through. General Calrissian's voice carries a note of amazement. "Luke, you need to see what's happening out here. The Imperial fleet isn't just surrendering, they're actively helping with our damaged ships. I've got Star Destroyer captains offering to tow our crippled cruisers to safety." Princess Leia's voice follows, equally amazed. "Luke, the reports coming in from across the galaxy, it's unprecedented. Imperial governors are resigning and calling for free elections. Moff Jerjerrod just broadcast a galaxy-wide apology for his role in building the Death Star and announced that he's turning over all Imperial construction resources to refugee relief efforts. But even more remarkable are the reports from the fringes of known space, where the Emperor's influence had been subtler but no less real. Explorers and traders returning from the unknown regions report that entire species that had been hostile to outsiders for generations are suddenly welcoming contact. Ancient feuds that have raged for centuries are ending as beings remember what they were originally fighting for and realize those causes are no longer worth the bloodshed. Admiral Akbar's voice joins the chorus of amazement. "Luke, we're receiving surrender requests from over 700 Imperial vessels, not just in this system, but from across the Outer Rim. Many are asking if they can join the rebellion to help rebuild what they've destroyed." Luke feels tears streaming down his face as the scope of the transformation becomes clear. This is not just the end of the Emperor's reign, but the beginning of something entirely new. A galaxy where beings are free to choose their own path without supernatural manipulation or coercion. But their moment of triumph is interrupted by urgent communications from the rebel fleet. General Calrissian's voice crackles through the comm with new urgency. "Luke, the Death Star's reactor is showing critical instability. I don't know what happened up there, but the entire station is starting to come apart. The energy readings are off the charts. You need to get out of there now." Through the viewport, Luke can see that Lando is right. The Death Star, no longer held together by the Emperor's supernatural will, is beginning to succumb to the damage inflicted during the battle. But more than that, the massive release of Force energy from the Emperor's transformation is destabilizing the station's already damaged reactor core. Emergency lights flash throughout the superstructure, and the low rumble of failing systems echoes through the corridors. Luke can feel through the Force that they have perhaps minutes before the station's destruction becomes inevitable. "Can you walk?" Luke asks his father, who nods and slowly gets to his feet. Anakin's recovery is remarkable. Without the dark side binding, draining his life force, his mechanical systems are functioning better than they have in years. He moves with an ease and grace that reminds Luke of the old holovids of Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. Together, they make their way toward the hangar where Luke's shuttle waits. But as they walk through the corridors of the dying battle station, they encounter other beings who have been transformed by the breaking of the Emperor's control. The corridors are filled with Imperial personnel in various states of shock and awakening. Some stand motionless, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Others are weeping openly, overwhelmed by the sudden return of emotions they had forgotten they possessed. Many are trying to help with the evacuation, their training taking over even as their worldview crumbles around them. Imperial technicians and officers, their faces showing confusion and dawning awareness, look around as if seeing their surroundings for the first time. Luke notices that many have removed their rank insignia, as if the symbols of Imperial hierarchy have suddenly become meaningless to them. A young Imperial lieutenant, barely out of the academy, approaches them with tears streaming down his face. "Lord Vader? Sir, I don't understand what's happening. I feel different, like I've been asleep for years and just woke up." Anakin places a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "You have been asleep, Lieutenant. We all have. But now, it's time to wake up and choose who we want to be." As they continue through the corridors, they encounter more and more Imperials experiencing the same awakening. A squad of stormtroopers has removed their helmets and is helping evacuate civilian contractors from the lower levels. A group of TIE pilots is organizing the rescue of rebel prisoners from the detention blocks. "We need to help them," Luke says, stopping to assist a group of technicians who are trapped behind a sealed blast door that has malfunctioned due to the station's failing systems. Luke uses the Force to tear open the heavy door, the screech of rending metal echoing through the corridor. As the Imperials rush through the opening, several stop to thank him, their faces showing a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Why are you helping us?" one of them asks. "We're your enemies." "No," Luke replies simply. "You're not my enemies. You never were. You were just people who didn't have a choice." Anakin watches as his son helps Imperial after Imperial reach the evacuation shuttles. "You're showing them mercy, even after everything they've done." "They weren't really free to choose before," Luke replies, using the Force to lift a fallen beam that was blocking another group of evacuees. "Now they are. What they do with that freedom is up to them." As they move deeper into the station, the effects of the Emperor's transformation become even more apparent. In one corridor, they find a group of Imperial intelligence officers systematically destroying their own surveillance equipment and data files. 30 years of spying on innocent people, one of them says, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. 30 years of ruining lives for the sake of security. How do we even begin to make amends for that? A senior technician who had been working on the Death Star's super laser is broadcasting instructions to all Imperial forces on how to disable similar weapons. The technical specifications for planetary destruction devices are being transmitted now, she announces over the comm. Any Imperial facility possessing such weapons must render them inoperative immediately. We will not be instruments of genocide. By the time they reach Luke's shuttle, they have gathered a large group of Imperial defectors who have chosen to abandon the Empire in favor of something better. The hangar is filled with beings from dozens of worlds and species, all united by their desire to help with the evacuation. Among them is a young TIE pilot who removes his helmet to reveal a face streaked with tears. "I've done terrible things," he says, his voice breaking. "How can I ever make up for what I've done?" Anakin places a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. By choosing to be better from this moment forward, the past cannot be undone, but the future is still unwritten. The pilot looks up at Anakin with recognition. "You're Anakin Skywalker, but you became Darth Vader." "Yes," Anakin acknowledges without shame. "I know what it feels like to have done things that seem unforgivable, but I also know that redemption is possible, no matter how far you've fallen." Agent Callus, an Imperial intelligence officer, steps forward. "I have the complete records of Imperial intelligence operations in 17 sectors, prisoner locations, safe house addresses. If I transmit all of this to the New Republic leadership..." The conversation is interrupted by Admiral Piet approaching with several Imperial Navy officers. "General Skywalker," Piet addresses Luke formally, "I want to offer the complete cooperation of Imperial Naval Command and approximately 60% of the Imperial fleet in reconstruction efforts." Luke studies the Admiral's face, sensing genuine transformation. "You're worried about the Imperial forces that haven't been transformed, aren't you?" Piet nods grimly. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Moff Gideon, various warlords who will likely try to carve out territories from the Empire's remains. They will not go quietly. "Then we'll deal with them when the time comes," Luke says simply. "But right now, we need to get off this station." General Calrissian's voice crackles urgently over the comm. "All evacuation shuttles, clear the station immediately." We're reading massive energy buildups throughout the superstructure. The evacuation effort shifts into high gear as Imperial and Rebel personnel work together with remarkable efficiency. Years of military training take over as former enemies coordinate their efforts to save lives without regard for past allegiances. Imperial stormtroopers, many with their helmets removed to reveal anxious human faces, help carry wounded rebels to medical shuttles. Rebel pilots share their ship's carrying capacity with Imperial personnel who have no other means of escape. Naval officers from both sides coordinate traffic control to prevent collisions as hundreds of shuttles move through the station's hangar bays. Luke's own shuttle, originally designed to carry perhaps a dozen passengers, is packed with over 40 evacuees, representing dozens of different worlds and backgrounds. Humans from the core world sit beside Twi'leks from the Outer Rim. Former Imperial officers share space with Rebel soldiers, and everyone works together to care for the wounded and frightened. As Luke's shuttle lifts off from the dying Death Star, it carries not just the heroes of the rebellion, but dozens of former Imperial personnel who have chosen to dedicate their lives to undoing the harm they were part of. The cargo hold is packed with technicians, pilots, officers, and analysts who are already working on plans to disable Imperial weapons, free political prisoners, and provide aid to worlds devastated by Imperial rule. Through the cockpit viewport, Luke looks back at the massive battle station one final time. It has been the symbol of Imperial tyranny and the instrument of unspeakable atrocities, but now it serves as the birthplace of a new kind of hope. The hope that even the darkest heart can be redeemed through love and sacrifice. The Death Star's destruction, when it comes moments later, is unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. Instead of the violent explosion that had destroyed its predecessor, this Death Star seems to simply dissolve. The dark side energies that had held its massive bulk together transform into something else entirely, creating a spectacular light show that can be seen from worlds away. The light that emerges from the station's death is not the harsh white of destruction. but something warmer and more welcoming, like the light of dawn after the longest night. It spreads outward in waves, touching every ship in the system with a gentle radiance that seems to heal both mechanical damage and spiritual wounds. Rebel ships that had been crippled in the battle find their systems mysteriously repaired, their engines humming with renewed efficiency. Imperial vessels that had been preparing to self-destruct rather than surrender discover that their weapon systems have been safely disabled, leaving them helpless but alive. And across both fleets, beings feel a sense of peace and hope that many had thought lost forever. The light show continues for nearly an hour, visible throughout the system and beyond. On distant worlds, beings look up at the sky and see the aurora-like displays that mark the death of the Empire's greatest symbol of terror. Many who witness it report feeling a sense of renewal, as if some great weight has been lifted from the galaxy itself. As the last traces of the Death Star's transformation fade into the cosmic background, Luke's shuttle and hundreds of others make their way toward the forest moon of Endor. The journey, which should have been a simple evacuation flight, becomes something far more significant, a pilgrimage of sorts, as beings from across the galaxy converge on what will become known as the site of the Great Awakening. During the flight to Endor, Luke has the opportunity to speak with many of the Imperial defectors aboard his shuttle. Their stories are as varied as their backgrounds, but they share common themes of gradual awakening to the reality of what they had been part of. Commander Versio, who had led an elite Imperial Special Forces unit, describes her experience. "We called ourselves Inferno Squad, and we were proud of our efficiency in eliminating rebel cells. It wasn't until today that I realized we weren't eliminating terrorists. We were murdering families whose only crime was wanting freedom for their children." A former Imperial propaganda minister named Yolanda tells a different but equally harrowing story. "I spent 10 years crafting messages to convince people that the Empire's oppression was actually protection, that freedom was dangerous, and order was salvation. I was so good at my job that I convinced myself it was true. Today, I remembered what it felt like to think for myself." An Imperial engineer named Titus shares his own revelation. "I designed more efficient slave labor systems, telling myself I was improving productivity and economic efficiency. I never let myself think about the beings whose lives I was destroying. I have blueprints for facilities on a dozen worlds, to facilities that need to be shut down immediately." Each story adds to Luke's understanding of how the Empire had functioned, not just as a military organization, but as a vast system of mutual deception and willful blindness that had enabled ordinary people to participate in extraordinary evil. But he also sees in their transformation the hope for something better. "What we need to do now," Luke tells the group, "is make sure that this awakening spreads to everyone who was part of the Imperial system. Not everyone will be as fortunate as you were to experience the transformation directly. Many will need help to see what they were part of and find their way to something better." Agent Callus, who has been compiling data files throughout the journey, looks up from his work. "I've been thinking about that. We could establish truth and reconciliation committees in every sector, places where former Imperial personnel can come forward with information about war crimes and atrocities in exchange for amnesty and the chance to make amends." The idea resonates with many of the others. Admiral Piet suggests creating veteran support groups for former Imperial military personnel struggling to adjust to the new reality. Commander Versio proposes using former Imperial Special Forces as search and rescue specialists to locate and free political prisoners. By the time they reach Endor's atmosphere, the evacuees have developed the framework for what will become known as the Imperial Truth and Reconciliation Program, a galaxy-wide effort to confront the reality of Imperial rule and channel the energy of redemption into constructive change. The forest moon itself has been transformed in the hours since the space battle. What had been a battlefield is now the site of an unprecedented gathering. Imperial and Rebel ships fill the orbital space around the moon. But instead of preparing for continued conflict, they are coordinating relief efforts on an unimaginable scale. As Luke's shuttle descends through the atmosphere, he can see the changes that have taken place on the surface. The Imperial garrison that had been defending the shield generator has not only surrendered, but has joined the rebels in establishing refugee camps for the thousands of Imperial personnel who are choosing to defect rather than continue, serving an empire they can no longer believe in. The shield generator itself, once a symbol of Imperial military might, has been converted into a communications hub for coordinating relief efforts across the galaxy. Its massive dish arrays, originally designed to project a defensive screen around the Death Star, are now being used to broadcast messages of hope and reconciliation to every world in Imperial space. Luke's shuttle lands in a clearing that has been hastily converted into a landing field, where Imperial and Rebel ground crews work side by side to direct the constant stream of arriving ships. The sight that greets Luke as he steps off the shuttle is one that will remain with him for the rest of his life. Ewoks work alongside Imperial stormtroopers to construct temporary shelters, their natural forest craft combining with Imperial engineering expertise to create efficient and comfortable accommodations for the thousands of beings who have sought refuge on the forest moon. Rebel commandos share their rations with former enemies, while Imperial cooks use their military food preparation skills to create meals for mixed groups of Rebels, Imperials, and Ewoks. The natural suspicion and hatred that had characterized the conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion seems to have evaporated, replaced by a common sense of purpose and shared humanity. Princess Leia coordinates with Imperial logistics officers to organize supply distribution, her diplomatic skills proving invaluable in managing the complex cultural and political sensitivities of integrating former enemies. Her presence serves as a bridge between different factions, helping to smooth over conflicts and misunderstandings that might otherwise derail the cooperation. Chewbacca's roar of greeting can be heard across the clearing as the Wookiee bounds toward Luke, followed closely by Han Solo and C-3PO. But their reunion is interrupted by the sight of R2-D2 rolling up beside a group of Imperial technicians, apparently helping them disable surveillance equipment that had been monitoring Ewok villages. Master Luke, C-3PO calls out excitedly, his photoreceptors gleaming with what might be interpreted as joy. "Oh, how wonderful to see you. I've been serving as a translator for the integration process. Did you know that Imperial basic training includes instruction in over 6,000 forms of communication? It's quite fascinating from a linguistic perspective and very helpful for coordinating relief efforts." R2-D2 responds with a series of excited beeps and whistles that C-3PO translates. R2 says he's been having the most interesting conversations with Imperial astromech units. Apparently, they've been secretly recording evidence of war crimes for years, hoping someone would eventually ask for it. He's very pleased to be helping compile the data. The reunion between Luke and his friends is emotional but brief. There is too much work to be done for extended celebration. But Luke can sense through the Force how much the transformation has affected everyone present. The bitter divisions that had characterized the rebellion's fight against the Empire are healing, replaced by a shared commitment to building something better. The space battle is winding down as Imperial forces either surrender or flee, their supernatural coordination gone and their will to fight broken by the sudden return of free will and moral clarity. The rebel fleet, though battered, has survived to fight another day. What follows is unlike any battle's end in galactic history. Instead of the typical chaos of victory and defeat, there is an almost ceremonial quality to the proceedings. Imperial Star Destroyers that had been trying to destroy rebel ships minutes before now position themselves to provide escort and protection for damaged rebel vessels. Captain Piet of the Superstar Destroyer Executor broadcasts on all frequencies. This is Admiral Piet of the Imperial Navy. All Imperial vessels are ordered to cease hostilities immediately and render assistance to any damaged ships, regardless of their allegiance. Any officer who continues to fire on non-combatants will be relieved of duty. The transformation of the Imperial fleet is remarkable to witness. Ships that had been instruments of oppression become tools of rescue and relief. Imperial engineers work alongside rebel technicians to repair damaged systems. Imperial medical staff tend to wounded rebels with the same care they show their own people. On the rebel flagship, Admiral Akbar watches the proceedings with amazement. In 30 years of fighting the Empire, he tells his staff, "I never imagined I would see Imperial crews volunteering to help us repair our ships. But the changes extend far beyond mere military cooperation." Imperial intelligence officers are broadcasting the locations of secret prisons and detention facilities throughout the galaxy, providing rebel forces with the information needed to free political prisoners. Imperial quartermasters are opening their supply depots to provide food and medical supplies to refugee populations. The transformation is so complete that many rebel commanders find themselves struggling to adapt to the new reality. Commander Wedge Antilles, leading Red Squadron back to the rebel fleet, reports, "Control, I have an entire TIE Interceptor squadron requesting permission to join the rebel escort. They want to help protect our damaged ships during the withdrawal." As Luke's shuttle approaches the rebel fleet, he can see the unprecedented cooperation taking place on every level. Imperial and rebel pilots are sharing technical information about their respective fighters. Imperial naval officers are coordinating with rebel fleet commanders to establish safe hyperspace routes for the evacuation. But most remarkably, there is genuine emotion involved in these interactions. Luke watches through the Force as lifelong enemies discover their common humanity. An Imperial pilot who had lost his brother to rebel fighters meets the rebel pilot responsible for the death. And instead of anger, there is understanding and shared grief for the futility of the conflict that divided them. When Luke's shuttle docks with the rebel flagship, he is greeted by Princess Leia, Han Solo, and General Calrissian. Their faces show a mixture of joy at his survival and amazement at what they have witnessed. "Luke," Leia says, embracing her brother, "what happened up there? I felt something through the Force, something I've never experienced before. It was like the galaxy itself was waking up." Luke looks at his sister, seeing the potential for Force training that has always been there, but has remained undeveloped. "The Emperor is gone, Leia. But more than that, His hold over the galaxy is broken. People are free to choose their own path for the first time in decades. Han, characteristically practical, gestures toward the viewport where Imperial and Rebel ships work side by side. Yeah, but what happens next? You can't tell me all these Imperials are just going to become rebels overnight. It's a valid concern, and one that Luke has been considering during the shuttle flight. The transformation they've witnessed is real, but it's also fragile. Without proper guidance and support, the sudden return of free will could lead to chaos rather than peace. That's why we need to get to Endor immediately, Luke says. The real work starts now. The flight to the forest moon is unlike any military movement in galactic history. Instead of separate Imperial and Rebel fleets, there is a single integrated armada dedicated to humanitarian relief and reconstruction. Imperial Star Destroyers fly alongside Mon Calamari cruisers, their crews working together to coordinate the massive relief effort that will be needed across the galaxy. During the journey, Luke spends time with the Imperial defectors who had been aboard his shuttle. Many are struggling to process their transformation, trying to understand how they could have participated in atrocities that now seem incomprehensible to them. One of them, a former Imperial intelligence analyst named Callus, approaches Luke with a data pad filled with information. Skywalker, I've been compiling a list of the Empire's most egregious crimes. Slave operations, political prisoner camps, environmental destruction projects. I want to make sure the new government has everything it needs to undo the damage. Luke nods approvingly. That's exactly the kind of help we need. But remember, you're not just providing information to the new government. You're part of it now. Your experience and knowledge will be crucial in building something better. As their ships emerge from hyperspace above Endor, Luke is amazed by what he sees. The forest moon, which had been a battleground just hours before, is now the site of an unprecedented gathering. Rebel and Imperial ships fill the orbital space around the moon. But instead of preparing for battle, they are coordinating relief efforts. On the surface, the changes are even more dramatic. The Imperial garrison that had been defending the shield generator has not only surrendered, but has joined the rebels in establishing refugee camps for the thousands of Imperial personnel who are choosing to defect rather than continue, serving an empire they can no longer believe in. Luke's shuttle lands near the former site of the shield generator, which has been converted into a makeshift command center for the relief operations. As he steps off the shuttle with his father, Luke is struck by the sight that greets them. Ewoks work alongside Imperial stormtroopers to construct temporary shelters. Rebel commandos share their rations with former enemies. Princess Leia coordinates with Imperial logistics officers to organize supply distribution. The natural suspicion and hatred that had characterized the conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion seems to have evaporated, replaced by a common sense of purpose. Chewbacca's roar of greeting can be heard across the clearing as the Wookiee bounds toward Luke, followed closely by Han Solo and Princess Leia. But their reunion is interrupted by an unexpected sight. C-3PO, leading a delegation of Imperial officers, speaking in what sounds like a dozen different languages as he helps coordinate the integration of defecting personnel. Master Luke, the golden droid, calls out excitedly. "Oh, how wonderful to see you. I've been serving as a translator for the integration process. Did you know that Imperial basic training includes instruction in 17 different languages? It's quite fascinating from a linguistic perspective." R2-D2 rolls up beside his counterpart, beeping and whistling in what Luke recognizes as excitement. The little astromech has apparently been helping Imperial technicians disable their own surveillance and control systems, but the most remarkable sight is yet to come. As Luke and Anakin make their way toward the command center that has been established near the former shield generator, they encounter groups of beings from across the galaxy who have come to Endor not as conquerors or liberators, but as volunteers seeking to be part of something greater than themselves. A Corellian freighter crew that had been running supplies for the Empire has converted their ship to carry medical supplies for refugee camps. Their captain explaining, "We spent 5 years helping the Empire squeeze the life out of worlds like Corellia. It's time we used our ships to put life back in." A group of Bothan spies who had been working against both sides in the conflict have arrived to offer their intelligence networks for humanitarian purposes. Their leader, a weathered female named Koth Melan, approaches Luke with data pads full of critical information. "We've spent years infiltrating both Imperial and Rebel networks," she explains. "We know where the bodies are buried, where the secret facilities are hidden, which officials are genuinely reformed, and which are just waiting for their chance to seize power. This information belongs to the new government, not to any single species or faction. Even former bounty hunters and smugglers have come forward, their ships and skills now offered in service of the massive reconstruction effort that lies ahead." Dengar, a bounty hunter who had spent years hunting rebels for Imperial bounties. Pilots, a converted prison ship now, filled with medical supplies, and volunteer medics. "I've got a lot of blood on my hands," he tells Luke simply. "Maybe I can't wash it all off, but I can try to keep other people's blood off someone else's hands." In the command center itself, Luke finds Princess Leia coordinating with an unlikely group of advisors that would have been unimaginable just days before. Admiral Akbar represents the rebel military, his tactical expertise invaluable in coordinating the massive logistical challenges of integrating 2 opposing militaries. But sitting beside him are former Imperial Admiral Piet, Grand Moff Jerjerrod, and General Veers, all of whom are enthusiastically contributing their expertise to the planning process. The sight of these former enemies working together with genuine mutual respect is a powerful symbol of how completely the galaxy's political landscape has shifted. "Luke," Leia says, looking up from a 3-dimensional holographic display showing refugee populations across 17 star systems, "we need to discuss the immediate political situation. With the Emperor gone and most of the Imperial hierarchy either defecting or in complete disarray, there's a power vacuum that needs to be filled carefully and thoughtfully." The holographic display is sobering in its scope. Entire star systems are reporting the collapse of local governments as Imperial officials either flee, surrender, or simply abandon their posts. Some worlds are celebrating their freedom, but others are descending into chaos as different factions try to seize control. "What are our immediate priorities?" Luke asks, though he suspects he already knows the complexity of the answer. Grand Moff Jerjerrod, a man who had been overseeing the Death Star's construction just hours before, speaks up with the authority of someone who understands the Empire's bureaucratic machinery intimately. "The Rebel Alliance has the moral authority to lead and the support of the galactic population, but it lacks the administrative infrastructure to govern a galaxy-wide civilization. The Imperial bureaucracy has that infrastructure, but it's been so thoroughly corrupted by the Emperor's influence that most of it needs to be completely rebuilt from the ground up." Admiral Piet nods in agreement, consulting a datapad filled with reports from across the Imperial fleet. We're seeing system-wide government collapses throughout the core worlds. On some planets, imperial governors have stepped down voluntarily and are calling for free elections. On others, there's complete chaos as criminal organizations, local warlords, and competing political factions try to seize control. Princess Leia brings up another section of the holographic display, this one showing reports from the galaxy's various species and cultures. We're getting similar reports from non-human worlds throughout the Outer Rim. Some species are celebrating their freedom from human-dominated imperial rule, but others are seeing the rise of xenophobic movements that want to exclude humans entirely from their governments. The complexity of the situation is staggering. The Empire hadn't just been a military organization. It had been the governmental, economic, and social structure that held together thousands of worlds with billions of different species, cultures, and political systems. Dismantling it completely would create chaos, but leaving it in place would perpetuate injustice. What about the Imperial fleet? Luke asks. How many have actually committed to supporting the new government versus how many are just waiting to see what happens next? Admiral Akbar consults his own tactical displays, which show the positions and status of Imperial forces throughout known space. Approximately 60% of the Imperial Navy has formally declared for what we're calling the New Republic. Another 20% has gone into hiding or retreated to the unknown regions. The remaining 20% is actively resisting the new order, mostly in the corporate sector and some parts of the wild space frontier. While the majority support is encouraging, Luke knows that the 20% still in active resistance represents thousands of star destroyers and millions of personnel. These are the forces that were either too far from the epicenter of transformation to be affected, or too deeply committed to the dark side to be redeemed. General Veers, his scarred face bearing the marks of decades of military service, provides additional context. The forces still in resistance aren't just random holdouts. They include some of the Empire's most capable and ruthless commanders. Grand Admiral Thrawn in the unknown regions, Moff Gideon in the Outer Rim, Admiral Dala with her fleet of star destroyers, and various sector governors who have declared themselves independent warlords. The mention of these names sends a chill through the assembled leaders. Even with the majority of Imperial forces transformed and cooperative, these remaining enemies represent a significant ongoing threat to galactic stability. Then we'll deal with them as they emerge, Luke says with quiet determination. But right now, we need to focus on building something positive rather than just fighting against what's left of the negative. What are our options for establishing a legitimate government? It's Mon Mothma who answers, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has spent years thinking about post-imperial governance. We have several models we've been considering. We could attempt to restore the old republic, but that system was so corrupt and inefficient that it created the conditions for the Empire's rise in the first place. We could establish a new federal system that gives more autonomy to individual worlds and species. Or we could create something entirely unprecedented, a truly democratic galactic confederation. The discussion that follows is complex and sometimes heated, but it's conducted with a level of mutual respect and good faith that would have been impossible during the war. Former enemies contribute their expertise willingly, united by their shared commitment to building something better than what came before. Grand Moff Jerjerrod, drawing on his experience managing multiple star systems, argues for a federal approach. Individual worlds need enough autonomy to maintain their unique cultures and political systems, but there also needs to be some central authority to coordinate defense, trade, and inter-system disputes. Admiral Piet, from his naval perspective, emphasizes the importance of maintaining some central military command. Without unified defense coordination, we'll see the rise of regional warlords and the return of the same inter-system conflicts that plagued the galaxy before the Empire. Princess Leia, with her background in both diplomacy and rebellion, advocates for strong democratic institutions. Whatever system we create needs to have robust protections for individual rights and minority species. The Empire's greatest crime wasn't just its brutality, but its systematic oppression of anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. As they debate the political structure, Luke finds himself thinking about the deeper philosophical questions raised by their transformation of the Emperor. The change they had achieved hadn't been political or military, but spiritual. A fundamental shift in how beings related to each other and to power itself. There's something else we need to consider, Luke interjects during a pause in the discussion. The Emperor's power didn't just come from military might or political control. It came from the dark side of the Force, from fear and hatred and the exploitation of people's worst impulses. If we want to build something that won't eventually fall to the same corruption, we need to think about how to structure a government that encourages people's better angels instead of their darker ones. The comment draws thoughtful nods from around the table. Anakin, who has been listening quietly to the discussion, speaks up for the first time. The Jedi Order failed. He says simply, his words carrying the weight of personal experience and hard-won wisdom. We failed because we became too removed from the people we were supposed to serve, too convinced of our own righteousness, too afraid of our own emotions and attachments. If Luke is going to rebuild the Jedi, and if we're going to create a government that serves the people instead of controlling them, we need to learn from those failures. Luke nods, understanding his father's point. The old Jedi Order forbade attachments, thinking that emotional connections led to the dark side. But what we learn today is that love, real love, not possessive attachment, is actually the strongest defense against darkness. Maybe the same principle applies to government. Princess Leia, whose own Force sensitivity has been growing stronger since the transformation, asks the crucial question, how do you design a government based on love instead of fear? It's a question that sparks hours of discussion as they work through the practical implications. The conversation ranges from constitutional law to military organization, from economic policy to interspecies relations. But underlying all the technical details is the revolutionary idea that government could be an expression of compassion rather than control. They discuss creating institutions that are transparent and accountable, where power is shared rather than concentrated. They talk about establishing truth and reconciliation processes that focus on healing rather than punishment. They explore ways to ensure that different species and cultures can maintain their uniqueness while participating in a larger galactic community. As the discussion continues, reports keep coming in from across the galaxy that illustrate both the opportunities and challenges they face. From Coruscant, they receive word that the Imperial Senate has voted to dissolve itself and call for new elections, but also that some senators are trying to position themselves as leaders of the transition. From Naboo, Queen Apailana reports that the planet's liberation has been largely peaceful, but that some human populations are struggling with the loss of the privileged position they held under Imperial rule. From Ryloth, Cham Syndulla announces that Twi'lek independence has been restored, but warns that centuries of imperial exploitation have left deep scars that will take generations to heal. Each report reinforces the magnitude of the task ahead. The transformation Luke and Anakin achieved in the Emperor's throne room had broken the supernatural bonds that held the Empire together, but building something better would require sustained effort from billions of beings across thousands of worlds. There's something else we need to address, Anakin says as the political discussion begins to wind down. The future of the Jedi Order. The old order is gone. It died with Order 66 and the Emperor's Purge. If there are going to be Jedi in this new galaxy, they need to be something fundamentally different. The room falls silent as everyone considers the implications. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi had been the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. Their destruction had paved the way for the Empire's rise. But their restoration couldn't simply mean going back to the old ways. Those ways had proven inadequate to the challenges they faced. What would a new Jedi Order look like? Leia asks, her question carrying personal weight, since her own Force abilities suggest she might be called to join such an order. Luke considers the question carefully before answering. The old Jedi were taught to suppress their emotions, to avoid attachments, to remain aloof from the very people they were supposed to protect. But emotions aren't evil. Fear, anger, and hatred are. But love, compassion, and joy are part of what makes us human, or Twi'lek, or Wookiee, or whatever species we happen to be. Anakin nods approvingly at his son's words. The Jedi I knew during the Clone Wars were at their best when they were working alongside ordinary soldiers and civilians, when they were part of communities, rather than separate from them. It was when they became isolated in the Jedi Temple, making decisions about the galaxy without consulting the people who would be affected by those decisions, that they lost their way. The discussion that follows explores the practical implications of rebuilding the Jedi Order on these new principles. Instead of a centralized temple on Coruscant, they discuss establishing smaller training centers throughout the galaxy, integrated into local communities. Instead of forbidding attachments, they talk about teaching Jedi to form healthy relationships, while avoiding the possessiveness and fear that lead to the dark side. Most importantly, they discuss changing the Jedi's role from that of mystical warriors to that of counselors, mediators, and healers. The new Jedi would still be trained in combat. The galaxy would always have need of defenders, but their primary mission would be to help beings resolve conflicts peacefully and to provide aid in times of crisis. The Force connects all living things, Luke explains, echoing lessons he had learned from both Yoda and his father's transformation. That means Jedi shouldn't be separate from other beings, but more connected to them. They should have families, friends, careers outside the Order. They should be part of the communities they serve, not apart from them. As the meeting continues into the evening hours of Endor's day, the scope of their discussions expands to include economic reconstruction, the integration of former Imperial military personnel, the establishment of new trade relationships between worlds that had been cut off from each other during the Imperial era, and dozens of other complex issues. But through it all, Luke is struck by the spirit of cooperation and good faith that characterizes the discussion. Former enemies contribute their expertise freely. Different species and cultures work together to find solutions that serve everyone's interests. The transformation that had begun in the Emperor's throne room is continuing to ripple outward, changing not just individual hearts, but the fundamental nature of how beings relate to each other. As the formal meetings wind down and people begin to disperse to their various responsibilities, Luke steps outside the command center to look up at the stars. The forest of Endor is peaceful around him, with the sounds of Ewok celebration mixed with the voices of humans, Twi'leks, Mon Calamari, Sulustans, and dozens of other species working together on the massive tasks ahead. The night sky is spectacular, unmarked by the light pollution that would characterize more developed worlds. Luke can see the Milky Way stretching across the heavens, each star representing worlds that are now free to choose their own destiny. For the first time in decades, Anakin joins him, moving with the easy grace of a man no longer burdened by mechanical prosthetics or the weight of the dark side. His presence in the Force is warm and peaceful, a far cry from the cold menace that had once characterized Darth Vader. "What are you thinking about, my son?" Anakin asks, his voice carrying the gentle affection of a father who never expected to have the chance to know his child. Luke considers the question for a long moment before answering. "I'm thinking about the future, about all the work that still needs to be done, all the challenges we'll face as we try to build this new government and new Jedi Order. But for the first time since I learned you were my father, I'm not afraid of what's coming, because you know we'll face it together. Because I know that love really can transform even the darkest situation, and that redemption is possible for anyone who chooses it." Luke pauses, looking at his father with deep affection and gratitude. Even someone who seemed completely lost to darkness for 20 years. Anakin places a hand on Luke's shoulder, and through their transformed bond, Luke feels his father's deep contentment and peace. The man who had spent 2 decades as one of the galaxy's most feared villains has found his way back to the light, not through destruction but through transformation, not through punishment but through love. "The work ahead won't be easy," Anakin says, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who has seen the galaxy at both its worst and its best. Building a civilization based on freedom and choice rather than control and fear. It's never been done on this scale before. There will be setbacks, failures, conflicts that test our commitment to these ideals. But it's possible, Luke replies with absolute certainty. "We proved that today. If a bond forged in darkness and maintained through 20 years of hatred can be transformed into a force for light and liberation, then anything is possible." As they stand together under the stars of Endor, father and son united at last, Luke can sense through the Force that similar conversations are taking place on worlds throughout the galaxy. Former enemies are becoming allies. Old wounds are beginning to heal, and new possibilities are emerging from the ashes of the Empire. On Coruscant, former Imperial officers work alongside rebel leaders to establish transitional governments. On Corellia, shipyards that had produced Star Destroyers begin retooling to build medical ships and exploration vessels. On Kashyyyk, Wookiees and humans work together to heal forests devastated by Imperial exploitation. The galaxy is healing, slowly but surely, as the transformation that began in the Emperor's throne room continues to spread from world to world, from heart to heart, from mind to mind. It's not a magical process that will solve all problems overnight, but it's a genuine change in the fundamental nature of how beings relate to each other and to power. Luke knows that there will still be conflicts to resolve, enemies to face, and challenges that will test their resolve. The Imperial remnants that rejected the transformation will not go quietly into the night. Criminal organizations will try to fill the power vacuum left by the Empire's collapse. Some worlds will struggle with the transition from authoritarian rule to democratic self-governance. But for the first time in his life, Luke feels genuinely optimistic about the galaxy's future. Not because the path ahead will be easy, but because he knows that the beings walking that path have been fundamentally changed by their experience of love's power to transform even the darkest bondage into the brightest freedom. The new republic that will emerge from this transformation will be imperfect, as all governments are. The new Jedi Order will face challenges and make mistakes, as all institutions do, but they will be built on a foundation of compassion rather than control, of service rather than domination, of love rather than fear. And that, Luke realizes as he stands with his father under the infinite stars, makes all the difference in the galaxy.